Bill Harrison froze mid-step on the hospital porch, his weathered hand gripping the rusted railing as the sound reached him through the December night. The deep, anguished bellowing wasn't coming from any ordinary cattle, it was Goliath, and something was terribly wrong. This wasn't the gentle rumble he'd grown to love over the past 3 months. Rebecca's coffee mug shattered against the porch floor as she bolted upright, her children's screams piercing the cold air from inside the ranch house. The massive Brahman bull's cries carried across the frozen pasture like a war horn, desperate and defiant. Through the kitchen window, 8-year-old Emma pressed her face against the glass, tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched the dark figures surrounding their gentle giant in the distance. Just hours ago, Goliath had been wearing a Christmas bow, patiently letting little Jack braid ribbons in his halter. "Call 911 now!" Bill shouted, his Marine training kicking in despite the terror clawing at his chest. What kind of monsters would attack a defenseless animal on Christmas Eve? And how much time did they have before losing the only family member who had never abandoned them? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The autumn heat shimmered off the cracked asphalt of the Beaumont Livestock Auction Yard as Bill Harrison climbed out of his battered Ford pickup, every joint in his 54-year-old body protesting the movement. The September sun beat down mercilessly on East Texas, and sweat already beaded on his forehead despite the early hour. He carried himself with the rigid posture of a man who had spent too many years expecting incoming fire, his gray hair cropped military short, and his blue eyes scanning the surroundings with automatic vigilance. Behind him, the truck bed held everything he owned in the world: a sleeping bag, 2 changes of clothes, a toolbox his grandfather had given him, and $47 in his wallet. The eviction notice from his last apartment was still crumpled in the glove compartment, a final reminder of how completely his life had unraveled since returning from Afghanistan. Bill hadn't come to the auction to buy livestock. He'd come because he had nowhere else to go. The VA Housing Assistance Program had put him on yet another waiting list. His disability claim was trapped in an 18-month bureaucratic maze, and his last construction job had ended when a supervisor's raised voice triggered a flashback that left Bill cowering behind a bulldozer, reliving an IED explosion from 8 years ago. His daughter Rebecca, a nurse in Houston, had made it clear that his episodes made him unwelcome around her children. His son Michael, climbing the corporate ladder in Dallas, had offered to pay for professional help but couldn't spare a guest room. Even his ex-wife Patricia had moved on, remarrying a stable cardiologist who didn't wake up screaming from nightmares or dive for cover when trucks backfired. The old Peterson ranch where his grandfather had once worked as foreman sat abandoned 20 miles outside town, its main house a shell of rotting boards and broken windows. But the property caretaker had offered Bill temporary shelter in exchange for basic maintenance, living in a rusted school bus parked in an overgrown field, but shelter nonetheless. As Bill walked toward the auction barn, the familiar sounds of cattle and auctioneers reminded him of childhood summers spent learning to rope and ride. Before the military, before the war, before everything fell apart, he'd been good with animals. They didn't judge him for his trembling hands or demand explanations for the night terrors that had cost him his marriage and every job since coming home. The auction yard buzzed with ranchers, dealers, and meat processors evaluating the day's offerings. Most were serious men in worn boots and sweat-stained hats, calculating profit margins and feed costs. But one man stood apart from the others, impeccably dressed in an expensive suit despite the heat, with cold blue eyes that evaluated the cattle like a predator sizing up prey. Richard Drummond's presence at a small-town livestock auction seemed odd, but Bill didn't think much about it. He was just looking for a quiet place to sit until the heat died down, maybe pick up odd jobs from ranchers needing extra hands. He had no idea that within hours he would bid on an animal he couldn't afford, challenging a man whose obsession would threaten everything he was trying to rebuild. The commotion near the holding pens caught Bill's attention as he nursed a lukewarm coffee outside the auction barn. 3 workers were struggling with what appeared to be the largest bull he'd ever seen, their frustrated shouts carrying across the dusty yard. The massive Brahmin stood motionless despite their efforts, his black coat gleaming with patches of deep russet brown that caught the harsh morning light. "Come on, you stubborn bastard!" one of the workers yelled, raising an electric prod toward the animal's flank. The bull's response was immediate and terrifying. With a bellow that seemed to shake the ground, he reared up on his hind legs, his enormous bulk making the men scatter like startled chickens. At 7 years old and nearly 1,400 pounds, he was a magnificent specimen of his breed, the distinctive hump on his shoulders rising like a mountain, his intelligent dark eyes reflecting a wisdom that seemed almost human. But what struck Bill wasn't the animal's raw power. It was his restraint. The bull could have easily trampled the workers, could have used his massive horns to deadly effect. Instead, he simply stood his ground, his gaze sweeping the crowd with what looked like calculated assessment. "That's Goliath," said a weathered voice beside Bill. He turned to see an elderly rancher in faded overalls, tobacco juice staining his gray beard. "Been watching auctions for 30 years. Never seen a bull quite like him." "He's enormous," Bill said, unable to look away from the animal. "Brahmin stock. Probably some Angus mixed in. But it ain't his size that's remarkable." The old man spat into the dirt. "That bull's got more sense than most people I know. Belonged to the Peterson Ranch until they went under last spring." Bill's chest tightened. The Peterson Ranch, where his grandfather had worked, where he'd spent summers as a boy learning to gentle horses and fix fence. What happened to the family? Same thing that's happening to small ranchers everywhere. Beef prices crashed, couldn't make the bank payments. Foreclosure sold everything at auction. The man's weathered face hardened. "Including livestock that should have been retired to pasture, not sent to the meat processor." Bill watched as the workers finally managed to coax Goliath toward the auction ring, using feed buckets and patience rather than force. The bull walked with dignity despite his circumstances, his massive head held high and alert. "He knows," Bill said quietly. "What's that?" "He knows where he's going. Look at his eyes." The old rancher studied Bill's face with new interest. "You got experience with livestock, son?" "Some. Grew up working cattle before I joined the Marines. Haven't been around them in 20 years, but you never forget how to read an animal's mind." In the auction ring, Goliath stood perfectly still as the auctioneer rattled off his statistics in rapid-fire delivery. 7 years old, 1,400 pounds, healthy breeding stock despite his advanced age. But Bill could see what others missed. The slight tremor in the bull's flanks. The way his ears swiveled constantly toward every sound. This wasn't defiance or aggression. This was fear mixed with resignation. "Do I hear $500? $500 for this magnificent Brahmin bull?" No hands went up. Goliath was too old for most breeding programs, too large for small operations, too expensive to feed as a pasture ornament. "400. Surely someone can use this fine animal for $350. Still nothing. Bill felt his chest tighten as he realized where this was heading. When livestock didn't sell at regular auction, they went to the meat processors for whatever price they could get. 300, 250. Come on, folks, look at the muscle on this animal. That's when the man in the expensive suit raised his hand. Bill recognized him from livestock magazines. Richard Drummond, CEO of Drummond Beef Enterprises, one of the largest meat processing operations in Texas. "I have 200 from Mr. Drummond," the auctioneer called out. 200 going once." Bill's hand shot up before his brain could stop it. 250. Every head in the arena turned toward him. Bill felt heat rise in his cheeks as dozens of eyes assessed the homeless veteran in worn jeans and a faded Marine Corps t-shirt. $47 in his wallet, and he was bidding on a bull he couldn't afford to feed for a single day. Drummond's cold blue eyes fixed on Bill, evaluating him like a predator sizing up unexpected competition. The man had the look of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted, and he clearly didn't appreciate interference from a nobody. 300, Drummond called out, his voice carrying the authority of wealth and influence. Bill's mind raced. This was insane. He was homeless, nearly broke, living in a rusted school bus. The last thing he needed was a 1,400-pound responsibility, but something in Goliath's eyes, that same desperate resignation Bill had seen in his own mirror for months, made the decision for him. 350, Bill said, his voice carrying across the arena with the authority he'd learned commanding Marines in combat. The murmur that ran through the crowd was electric with anticipation. Drummond's face darkened, and he leaned over to whisper something to the man beside him. Bill caught the words, "unstable veteran" and "investigate this." 400, Drummond said. Bill felt sweat beading on his forehead as he stared across the auction ring at Richard Drummond. The wealthy businessman's expression had shifted from mild annoyance to something darker, more personal. This wasn't just about acquiring livestock anymore. This had become a contest of wills between two men who understood that backing down meant more than losing money. 450, Bill called out, his voice steady despite the panic clawing at his chest. His last credit card was already maxed out with emergency expenses, but something about Goliath's dignified suffering demanded action, even reckless action. Drummond studied Bill for a long moment, his calculating gaze taking in the worn clothes, the weathered hands, the barely concealed desperation of a man with nothing left to lose. Then he shook his head and sat back with a thin smile that never reached his eyes. It wasn't the expression of someone who had lost. It was the look of a predator choosing his moment to strike. 450, going once, going twice, sold to bidder number 47. As the auctioneer's gavel fell, Bill realized he had just committed financial suicide for an animal he had no way to house, feed, or transport. But when Goliath turned his massive head toward the sound of Bill's voice, those intelligent dark eyes seemed to hold something that made the decision feel right for the first time in years. Recognition, gratitude, understanding. The paperwork nightmare that followed tested every limit of Bill's patience and creditworthiness. The auction house required payment immediately, insurance waivers and transportation arrangements for an animal that needed a heavy-duty livestock trailer. Bill's hands shook as he signed document after document, knowing each signature pushed him deeper into debt he could never repay. "You sure you know what you're doing, friend?" asked Joe Martinez, a compact man in his 50s who had been watching the auction with growing concern. "That's a lot of bull for a man with no ranch." "I'm sure I don't know what I'm doing," Bill admitted, "but I couldn't let him go to slaughter. There's something special about him." Joe nodded slowly. As a fellow veteran who ran a small horse rescue operation outside Beaumont, he understood the pull of a desperate rescue mission, even when logic argued against it. "I've got a livestock trailer and about 20 acres that could use some natural lawn mowing. Temporary arrangement while you figure things out." Loading Goliath required 3 ranch hands and careful patience. The bull cooperated with surprising gentleness, stepping into the trailer as if he understood these men were trying to help rather than harm him. During the hour-long drive to Joe's ranch, Bill found himself checking the rearview mirror constantly, half expecting the massive animal to somehow vanish like a fever dream. At Joe's place, they unloaded Goliath into a large pasture bordered by sturdy pipe fencing. The bull stood motionless for several minutes, surveying his temporary sanctuary, then began to graze with what looked like profound relief. But Bill noticed something else. Goliath had positioned himself near the fence line where he could see both the ranch house and the access road. The bull was keeping watch, a behavior Bill recognized from his military training. That night, Bill slept in his truck parked beside the pasture. He told himself it was to monitor Goliath's adjustment to new surroundings, but the truth was more complicated. For the first time in months, he felt responsible for something other than his own survival. It was terrifying and liberating simultaneously. He woke before dawn to find Goliath standing near the truck, separated only by fence rails. The bull's massive head was turned toward Bill, and when their eyes met, Goliath rumbled softly, a sound that was almost like a greeting between friends. "Morning, big guy," Bill said quietly, climbing out of the truck with movements still stiff from sleeping in cramped quarters. Goliath approached the fence with surprising grace for such an enormous animal. Up close, Bill could see the intelligence in those dark eyes, the way the bull cataloged and assessed everything around him with almost human awareness. Bill reached through the fence to scratch behind Goliath's ears. The bull's hide was warm and surprisingly soft, and he leaned into the touch like an oversized dog seeking affection from his favorite person. "You're not what people expect, are you?" Bill murmured. "They see the size and the horns and think, dangerous. But you're just a gentle soul who got dealt a bad hand in life." As if in response, Goliath rumbled again, the sound vibrating through Bill's chest and somehow easing the constant tension he'd carried for years. There was something profoundly calming about the bull's presence, a patience and acceptance that made Bill feel less alone than he had since returning from war. 3 days into their arrangement, Bill received the phone call that changed everything. "Mr. Harrison?" The voice was crisp and official. "This is Sarah Chen from County Animal Control. We've received complaints about unsafe housing conditions for livestock at your current location." Bill's blood went cold. "Complaints from who?" "I'm not at liberty to reveal the source, but we're required to investigate any reports of animal welfare concerns. We'll need to inspect the premises and evaluate the animals' living conditions." "When?" "Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Please have all relevant documentation available." After she hung up, Bill sat in his truck, staring at the phone. 3 days. Goliath had been safe for exactly 3 days before someone, and Bill had a strong suspicion who, had decided to escalate the situation. In the pasture, Goliath was grazing peacefully in the morning sun, unaware that forces beyond their control were already moving to separate them. The bull looked up as if sensing Bill's distress, then walked over to the fence and pressed his massive head against the rails in what had become their ritual of mutual comfort. "They're coming for you tomorrow," Bill told the bull quietly. "I don't know how to stop them." Goliath's rumble was deep and reassuring, but Bill could see something else in those intelligent eyes now, a wariness that suggested the bull understood danger was approaching, even if he couldn't comprehend its exact nature. The White County pickup truck arrived exactly at 10 o'clock, followed by a sedan with government plates and a third vehicle that made Bill's stomach clench with recognition. Richard Drummond's black Mercedes. Bill watched from the pasture fence as officials in uniforms climbed out, all wearing the expressions of people dealing with an unpleasant but necessary task. Sarah Chen led the group, a thin woman with severe glasses and a clipboard thick with official documents. Behind her walked a veterinarian Bill didn't recognize, and 2 deputies who seemed more interested in Goliath's impressive size than any potential danger he might pose. But it was Drummond's presence that transformed this from a routine inspection into something far more sinister. The businessman emerged from his Mercedes wearing an expression of false concern, like a prosecutor who already knew the verdict before the trial began. "Mr. Harrison," Chen called out as the group approached. "Thank you for making yourself available for this inspection." "What exactly are we inspecting?" Bill asked, though he suspected he already knew. "Animal welfare concerns," Chen replied, consulting her clipboard. "Specifically, reports that livestock is being kept in unsafe conditions by someone who may not be capable of providing proper care." Drummond stepped forward with practiced sympathy. Mr. Harrison, I tried to handle this privately when I offered to purchase your bull, but when I drove by last week and saw the living conditions, I felt I had a moral obligation to involve the proper authorities. You've been surveilling my property? I was concerned about a valuable animal being kept in substandard conditions by someone who clearly lacks the resources to provide adequate care. Drummond's voice carried the smooth authority of a man accustomed to having his version of events accepted without question. The inspection that followed was thorough and humiliating. They documented everything: Joe's modest facilities, Bill's temporary sleeping arrangement in his truck, the basic setup he'd rigged for Goliath's food and water. Every detail was photographed and noted, creating an official record that painted Bill as an unstable man living rough with a dangerous animal. But when they reached Goliath himself, the bull's magnificent condition was undeniable. His coat gleamed with health, his eyes were bright and alert, and he moved with the easy grace of an animal in perfect physical condition. The veterinarian, Dr. James Mitchell, spent over an hour examining Goliath, while the bull stood patiently, occasionally rumbling in what sounded like conversation. "The animal appears to be in excellent health," Dr. Mitchell admitted reluctantly as he packed up his equipment. "Well fed, properly hydrated, no signs of stress or neglect." Chen made notes on her clipboard, clearly struggling to find fault with Goliath's obvious well-being. But Drummond wasn't finished. "Dr. Mitchell, in your professional opinion, is this environment suitable for an animal of this size and strength? And is Mr. Harrison, given his documented mental health issues, capable of maintaining control over such a potentially dangerous creature?" Bill felt rage building in his chest, but Dr. Mitchell's response surprised everyone. "Mr. Drummond, I've been treating livestock for 40 years, and I can tell you that this bull shows remarkable socialization and training. Someone has spent considerable time gentling this animal. He's actually one of the calmest, most well-behaved bulls I've encountered." "But surely the living arrangements—" "The living arrangements are temporary," Bill interrupted. "I'm in the process of securing permanent housing for both of us." Drummond's mask of concern slipped slightly, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "Mr. Harrison, I'm prepared to offer you $8,000 for the bull. That would solve your housing problems and ensure the animal receives proper professional care." The offer hung in the air like a challenge. $8,000 would pay off Bill's debts, give him a security deposit on an apartment, maybe even fund job training. It was more money than he'd seen in months. But as he looked at Goliath, standing calmly in the pasture but clearly alert to the tension among the humans, Bill knew he couldn't accept. This wasn't about money. This was about something Drummond could never understand: the bond between two damaged souls who had found healing in each other's company. "He's not for sale," Bill said quietly. Drummond's composure cracked further. "Mr. Harrison, you're living in your truck. You can't even provide basic shelter for yourself, let alone a 1,400-pound animal. This isn't about sentiment. This is about reality. The reality is that Goliath is healthy, well cared for, and content." "Your concern seems awfully specific for someone who supposedly just wants to help." The comment hit home. Drummond's face flushed with anger, and for a moment his carefully constructed facade completely disappeared. "That animal is dangerous. Bulls like him have killed people. They're unpredictable, aggressive by nature. You're putting the entire community at risk because of some misguided attachment to a creature that could snap and kill someone without warning." The vehemence in Drummond's voice revealed something Bill hadn't expected. This wasn't just about business or even animal welfare. This was personal, driven by emotions that ran much deeper than concern for public safety. "Has Goliath ever shown aggressive behavior toward you or anyone else?" Dr. Mitchell asked pointedly. "That's not the point. Bulls of this size are inherently dangerous." "I didn't ask about bulls in general. I asked about this specific animal." Drummond seemed to realize he'd revealed too much. He composed himself with visible effort, but the damage was done. His obsession with Goliath was now obvious to everyone present. Chen looked up from her clipboard. "Mr. Harrison, we can't force you to sell your animal. However, we do have concerns about the temporary nature of your housing arrangement. We'll need to schedule follow-up inspections to ensure continued compliance with animal welfare standards." After the officials left, Bill stood in Joe's driveway, feeling like he'd won a battle but was losing the war. They'd be back, and next time they might find grounds for seizure. Drummond's parting look had been one of barely controlled fury, the expression of a man who wasn't used to being denied and wouldn't accept defeat gracefully. That evening, Bill couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Drummond's reaction, the way the man's carefully controlled demeanor had slipped when his offer was refused. There was something deeply personal in Drummond's hatred of Goliath, something that went far beyond business concerns or community safety. Around midnight, Bill was jolted awake by the sound of Goliath's distressed lowing. The bull was agitated, pacing near the fence and making deep, rumbling calls that Bill had never heard before. Not the gentle sounds of contentment he'd grown to love, but urgent warnings that raised the hair on his arms. Bill grabbed a flashlight and ran outside. In the beam of light he could see Goliath standing at the far end of the pasture, his massive body tense with alarm. The bull was looking toward the county road, his attention fixed on something in the darkness beyond the fence line. Then Bill saw it, the glint of metal reflecting his flashlight beam. A vehicle was parked on the road with its lights off, positioned so the occupants could watch the ranch without being easily detected. Someone was conducting surveillance, and Bill had a sinking suspicion he knew who. He started toward the fence, but Goliath's behavior stopped him. The bull had positioned himself between Bill and the road, his posture clearly protective. The message was unmistakable. "Stay back. There's danger out there." For 20 minutes the surveillance continued. Bill could occasionally see movement in the vehicle. Someone shifting position, the brief glow of a cell phone screen, the subtle adjustment of what might have been binoculars or a camera. Then the vehicle started up and drove away without ever turning on its headlights. Bill spent the rest of the night on Joe's front porch with a baseball bat across his knees, while Goliath maintained his vigil near the fence. Neither man nor bull slept until dawn brought the illusion of safety. The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything. "Mr. Harrison, this is Elena Vasquez from the Austin American-Statesman. I'm an investigative reporter working on a story about Drummond Beef Enterprises and certain irregularities in their business practices. I understand you recently had a confrontation with Richard Drummond?" Bill was instantly wary. "Who told you that?" "I can't reveal my source, but I can tell you that you're not the first livestock owner Drummond has targeted. There's a pattern here, Mr. Harrison, and I believe your story might be the key to exposing something that's been going on for years." "What kind of pattern?" "It's too sensitive to discuss over the phone. Can we meet in person? What I have to show you could change everything." They arranged to meet that afternoon at a diner in Beaumont, far enough from Joe's ranch to avoid unwanted attention. Elena Vasquez turned out to be a woman in her 40s, with the weathered look of someone who spent her time investigating stories others wanted buried. She carried a thick folder that she placed on the table between them like evidence in a trial. "Mr. Harrison, how much do you know about Richard Drummond's personal history?" "Nothing beyond his business reputation." "Why?" Elena opened the folder, revealing newspaper clippings, court documents, and photographs that made Bill's blood run cold. 10 years ago, Drummond's 18-year-old son was killed in a car accident. The official report blamed mechanical failure, but there were complicating factors that never made it into the public record. She showed Bill a police report marked confidential. Drummond had been driving when they hit a guardrail at 60 miles per hour. His blood alcohol was just under the legal limit, but witnesses reported erratic driving behavior consistent with impairment. "That's tragic," Bill said, "but what does it have to do with Goliath? The accident happened on a rural road outside Austin." Drummond claimed he lost control trying to avoid a bull that had gotten loose from a nearby ranch. Elena pulled out a grainy photograph from the police file. This bull. The image showed a massive Brahman bull standing in a roadway, dark with russet patches, nearly identical to Goliath in size and coloring. Even in the poor-quality police photo, the resemblance was unmistakable. After the accident, Drummond became obsessed with tracking down this bull. He claimed it was a public safety hazard and demanded the owner put it down. When they refused, he used his wealth and connections to force them into bankruptcy, then bought their ranch at foreclosure and had the bull destroyed. Bill felt cold understanding creep over him. But that wasn't enough. No. Over the past 10 years, Drummond has systematically targeted owners of large Brahman bulls, especially those that physically resemble the one involved in his son's accident. He uses legal pressure, financial manipulation, and regulatory harassment to force owners into selling, then has the animals slaughtered. Elena showed him more documents, legal complaints, animal control reports, foreclosure notices. The pattern was clear and chilling. Drummond would identify bulls that triggered his traumatic memories, then use every resource at his disposal to ensure their destruction. "How many?" Bill asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 23 that I can document, maybe more." Elena's expression was grim. Drummond has convinced himself that destroying these animals prevents future accidents, but really he's just trying to kill his guilt and grief over and over again, using innocent animals as surrogates for the son he failed to protect. Bill stared at the photographs Elena had spread across the diner table, each one showing a magnificent Brahman bull that had been systematically hunted down and destroyed by a wealthy man's twisted grief. The faces of their owners, small ranchers, hobby farmers, families who had raised these gentle giants from calves, stared back at him from newspaper clippings documenting their forced sales and financial ruin. "Mr. Harrison, I think Goliath might be the one that got away," Elena said quietly. "If he was born around 2013 and his bloodline traces back to the Peterson Ranch, there's a chance he's directly connected to the bull in Drummond's original accident. That would explain the intensity of Drummond's obsession with acquiring him." The implications hit Bill like a physical blow. Goliath wasn't just another target in Drummond's campaign. He might be the ultimate prize, the living reminder of the night that destroyed Drummond's family and shattered his sanity. "What can I do?" Bill asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Help me expose this. Let me document your story, your relationship with Goliath. Show people what Drummond is really doing, not protecting communities from dangerous animals, but systematically destroying innocent creatures to feed his own psychological demons." Bill thought about the surveillance car, the escalating legal pressure, the cold fury in Drummond's eyes when his offer was refused. "If I go public, he'll come after us even harder. If you don't go public, he'll eventually win anyway. Men like Drummond are patient. They'll keep applying pressure until something breaks. Your finances, your health, your will to fight. But exposure is the one thing they can't control." That night, Bill sat with Goliath as the sun set over the East Texas landscape. The bull seemed to sense the weight of their situation, staying close to the fence and occasionally rumbling in his deep, comforting voice that had become as familiar as a friend's presence. "You know what he wants, don't you?" Bill said quietly, reaching through the fence to scratch behind Goliath's ears. "You can sense the hatred in him, the danger he represents." Goliath's dark eyes reflected the dying light, ancient and wise and infinitely patient. There was something in his gaze that suggested he understood more than any animal should, that he knew his own history was somehow connected to Drummond's pain, and that this confrontation had been inevitable from the moment Bill raised his hand at that auction. Bill made his decision. If Drummond wanted a fight, he would get one, but it would be a public fight, conducted in the light of media scrutiny rather than hidden in bureaucratic shadows. Bill would not let Goliath disappear quietly into Drummond's web of revenge. The story Elena published 3 days later sent shockwaves through the Texas agricultural community. The Bull Hunter, How Grief Became Obsession, detailed Drummond's decade-long campaign against innocent animals, complete with photographs, legal documents, and testimony from 23 families whose lives had been destroyed by one man's inability to face his own guilt. The centerpiece of the article was Bill and Goliath's story, the homeless veteran who had rescued a gentle giant from slaughter, only to discover that the bull was the target of a wealthy man's twisted quest for revenge against his own failures as a father and driver. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Animal rights groups rallied to Goliath's defense, organizing protest vigils outside Drummond Beef Enterprises. Veteran support organizations highlighted Bill's story as an example of the healing power of human-animal bonds. Local news stations picked up the story, and within a week, Joe's Ranch was receiving visitors from across the state who wanted to meet the gentle giant who had captured the nation's heart. Children pressed against the pasture fence, eyes wide with wonder as Goliath approached with his characteristic calm dignity. He seemed to understand that he had become something larger than himself, a symbol of innocence under assault, of the powerful preying on the defenseless. But the attention also brought new dangers. Drummond's response was swift and vicious, channeled through an army of lawyers and regulatory officials who suddenly discovered violations everywhere they looked. Zoning infractions appeared overnight. Livestock permits were challenged on technical grounds. Questions arose about Bill's mental competency to own dangerous animals, backed by carefully orchestrated testimony from concerned citizens who had never met him. The pressure intensified when Child Protective Services received anonymous tips about children being exposed to dangerous animals at the ranch. Though no children lived there, the investigation required extensive documentation and legal representation that neither Bill nor Joe could afford. Then came the death threats. "You're going to get someone killed with that monster," the disguised voice said during the first call. "That bull is a killer, and you're too crazy to see it. Get rid of it, or we'll get rid of both of you." The calls came at all hours, always from different numbers, always brief enough to avoid tracing. But their message was consistent. Goliath was dangerous, Bill was unstable, and both would be eliminated if they didn't disappear voluntarily. Bill reported the threats to Sheriff Martinez, a weathered lawman who had known him since his return from Afghanistan. Martinez promised to investigate, but without more specific evidence, there was little law enforcement could do beyond increasing patrols in the area. Goliath seemed to sense the escalating danger. The bull became more protective, positioning himself between Bill and any strangers who approached the ranch. His gentle demeanor remained unchanged around people he trusted, but his alertness to potential threats was constant and exhausting. The breaking point came on a December morning when Bill woke to find his truck's tires slashed and a message spray-painted across the windshield. Last warning. But it was the discovery in Goliath's pasture that truly chilled Bill's blood. Someone had scattered chunks of raw meat laced with what looked like broken glass near the bull's water trough. If Goliath had eaten the poisoned bait, he would have died in agony from internal bleeding. "This has gone too far," Sheriff Martinez said as he bagged the evidence. "This isn't harassment anymore. This is attempted murder of livestock, which is a felony in Texas. We're going to set up surveillance cameras and increase patrols, but Bill, you need to consider your safety and that bull's security. You're saying I should give up. I'm saying that whoever's doing this is escalating toward violence. They've moved from legal pressure to direct threats to attempted poisoning. The next step might be something none of us can prevent. That evening, Bill received a call that would change everything. His daughter Rebecca, who had been following the media coverage with growing concern, announced that she was driving down from Houston with her children. "Dad, I've been reading about what's happening to you and Goliath. I need to see for myself what this is all about. Rebecca, it's not safe here right now. Someone tried to poison Goliath this morning, which is exactly why I need to come." "Dad, I've spent 3 years thinking you were falling apart, that buying this bull was another symptom of your problems. But what if I was wrong? What if I've been so focused on your illness that I missed your healing?" The next afternoon, Rebecca arrived with 8-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Jack, who had been hearing stories about their grandfather's giant bull friend but had never seen Goliath in person. Bill watched nervously as his daughter surveyed Joe's modest ranch, noting the basic facilities and the obvious signs of financial stress. "Dad, this place is pretty rough," Rebecca said, her nurse's eye cataloging the makeshift arrangements and security concerns. "I know it's not much, but it's honest work keeping it up. And Goliath helps more than you might think." "A bull helps with ranch work?" Bill led them to the pasture where Goliath was grazing in the afternoon sun. The children stayed close to their mother, wide-eyed at the sight of the massive animal who seemed even larger than the photographs had suggested. "He's huge," Emma whispered, unconsciously gripping her mother's hand. "He's also the gentlest creature you'll ever meet," Bill said. "Watch this." Bill approached the fence and called Goliath's name. The bull lifted his massive head and walked over with the easy gait of a large dog responding to his owner's call, his hooves making soft thunder against the ground. "Goliath, I want you to meet my family. This is Rebecca, my daughter, and these are my grandchildren, Emma and Jack." The bull studied the visitors with his intelligent dark eyes, then lowered his enormous head and rumbled softly, a sound that vibrated through the ground and seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "He's saying hello," Bill explained to the wide-eyed children. Emma stepped forward cautiously, her natural curiosity overcoming her fear. "Can I pet him, Grandpa?" "Very gently. Let him sniff your hand first, just like you would with any dog." What followed was magical. Goliath extended his massive head toward Emma's small hand, sniffing delicately before allowing her to stroke his velvety nose. His rumble of approval was so deep it seemed to come from the earth itself. "He's so soft," Emma exclaimed, her face lighting up with delight. Jack, emboldened by his sister's success, approached the fence with the fearless confidence of a 5-year-old. Goliath repeated the gentle greeting, and soon both children were petting the enormous bull while he stood perfectly still, patient as a saint with his small admirers. Rebecca watched with growing amazement. "Dad, I've never seen anything like this. He's so aware, so present. It's like he understands everything that's happening." "He does understand," Bill said. "More than most people give him credit for." "Watch this." Bill began walking toward the house, then stopped and looked back at Goliath. "Come on, boy. Time to show off for the family." The bull walked to the gate that separated the pasture from the yard and carefully lifted the latch with his horn, swinging the gate open with practiced ease. The children gasped in delight as Goliath stepped through and approached their little group. But instead of coming directly to Bill, Goliath walked to Rebecca and gently nudged her shoulder with his massive head, a formal introduction that made her gasp with surprise and wonder. "He's saying hello properly," Bill explained. "Goliath, this is my family. They're important to me, which means they're important to you." The bull rumbled his understanding and leaned very gently against Rebecca's side, careful not to knock her over with his enormous weight, but clearly welcoming her into his small circle of trusted humans. Rebecca watched with tears streaming down her face as Goliath gently lowered his massive head so that little Jack could pat his nose. The sight of her 5-year-old son fearlessly interacting with the enormous bull while her father looked on with quiet pride shattered every assumption she'd held about Bill's mental state and his relationship with the animal she'd thought was a symptom of his breakdown. "Dad," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I owe you the biggest apology of my life. We were so wrong about everything." They spent the afternoon watching Goliath demonstrate his remarkable intelligence and gentle nature. The bull retrieved a frisbee that Emma threw, carrying it carefully in his mouth without puncturing the plastic. He allowed Jack to lead him around the yard with just a small hand on his massive neck, moving with the careful precision of a creature that understood his own power and the fragility of those he loved. But the most extraordinary moment came when Jack, tired from playing, curled up against Goliath's side for a nap in the warm afternoon sun. The bull remained perfectly motionless for 2 hours, occasionally glancing down at the sleeping child with an expression that could only be described as paternal protection. "He's protecting him," Rebecca whispered. "He knows Jack is little and needs watching over." "Goliath protects everyone he cares about," Bill said quietly. "It's just his nature." As evening approached, Rebecca helped Bill prepare a simple dinner, while the children continued to play with their enormous new friend. The transformation in the modest ranch house was remarkable. What had seemed like a desperate living situation in the morning now felt like a home filled with purpose and love. "Dad, I need to tell you something," Rebecca said, as they watched the children through the kitchen window. "Michael called me before I came here. He's been talking to lawyers about having you declared incompetent." Bill's face went pale. "On what grounds? Your living situation, your finances, your attachment to Goliath." "Dad, someone's been feeding Michael information about your mental state, suggesting that you're a danger to yourself and others because of this bull." "Drummond," Bill said grimly. "Even when his direct approaches fail, he finds other ways to apply pressure." Rebecca nodded. "But Dad, after seeing you with Goliath, after watching him with the kids, I'm going to call Michael tonight and tell him he's completely wrong. You're not losing your mind. You've found something that's healing you in ways that therapy never could." That evening, as Rebecca prepared to leave with the children, Emma threw her arms around Goliath's massive neck in a gesture that brought tears to every adult's eyes. "I love you, Goliath," she said with the absolute sincerity that only children possess. "You're the best bull in the whole world." Goliath rumbled softly and nuzzled the little girl's cheek with surprising gentleness, as if he understood the precious trust she was placing in him. "We'll come back next weekend," Rebecca promised. "The kids are already asking when they can see Goliath again." But the peace that followed their visit was short-lived. 3 days later, Bill was awakened in the pre-dawn darkness by sounds that made his blood freeze, the roar of multiple vehicle engines and the harsh glare of spotlights cutting through the December night. He grabbed his rifle and ran outside to find his worst nightmare unfolding before his eyes. 3 pickup trucks were positioned around Goliath's pasture, their headlights creating a harsh theater of light and shadow. Dark figures moved with military precision, carrying equipment that glinted metallically in the artificial illumination. In the center of the chaos stood Goliath, his massive form tense with alarm but not panic. The bull had positioned himself in the middle of the pasture, turning slowly to keep all the intruders in sight while protecting his back against the fence. His deep bellowing filled the night air, not cries of fear, but powerful warnings that announced the presence of danger to anyone within miles. "This is private property," Bill shouted, raising his rifle. "You're trespassing!" One of the figures stepped into the light, and Bill's heart sank as he recognized the expensive silhouette of Richard Drummond. The businessman wore dark clothing and an expression of cold determination that spoke of a man who had moved beyond legal maneuvering into direct action. "Mr. Harrison," Drummond called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "You've had multiple opportunities to resolve this situation peacefully. Tonight, it ends one way or another." "Sheriff's on the way?" Bill lied, hoping to buy time. "I doubt that very much. You see, we've made sure that law enforcement will be occupied elsewhere tonight. A series of anonymous tips about drug activity, domestic disturbances, suspicious vehicles. They'll be quite busy for the next several hours." As Drummond spoke, Bill could see his men positioning themselves with what looked like tranquilizer equipment, dart guns, and portable air compressors that could deliver enough sedative to drop an elephant. This wasn't harassment or legal pressure. This was an organized assault designed to incapacitate Goliath for transport to whatever fate Drummond had planned. "You can't just steal someone's livestock," Bill said, his voice carrying across the pasture. "I'm not stealing anything. I'm removing a dangerous animal that poses a threat to public safety. I have documentation showing this bull's aggressive history, witness statements about attacks on humans, veterinary reports indicating dangerous behavioral patterns." "Those are lies, and you know it." Drummond's laugh was cold and humorless. "Truth is whatever can be proven in court, Mr. Harrison. And by the time this reaches any courtroom, there won't be an animal left to argue about." In the pasture, Goliath seemed to understand that words had failed and violence was imminent. The bull's posture changed from defensive to actively protective as he positioned himself to charge any intruder who entered his territory. His intelligence was evident in the way he calculated angles and distances, planning his response to multiple threats simultaneously. "Easy, boy," Bill called out, knowing that Goliath's protective instincts might trigger exactly the kind of aggressive behavior Drummond needed to justify his actions. "Stay calm." But Drummond's men were already moving. The first tranquilizer dart hissed through the air, striking Goliath in the shoulder. The bull's bellow of pain and outrage shook the ground, and he whirled toward his attackers with speed that belied his enormous size. A second dart hit him in the flank, then a third. The massive doses of sedative would have dropped most animals immediately, but Goliath fought the effects through sheer determination and protective rage. He charged toward the fence line where the attackers were positioned, his hooves thundering against the earth like an approaching storm. The men scattered as 1,400 pounds of enraged bulls slammed into the fence with enough force to snap metal posts. But the drugs were taking effect, and Goliath's mighty legs began to buckle beneath him. Bill started running toward the pasture but stopped when he heard the distinctive sound of a rifle bolt being cycled. One of Drummond's men had him in the crosshairs of a high-powered weapon. "Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be," Drummond said calmly. "Your bull is going to sleep now. When he wakes up, he'll be somewhere safe where he can't hurt anyone." Goliath went down like a falling mountain, his massive body hitting the ground with an impact that seemed to shake the entire ranch. But even unconscious, he had managed to position himself near the gate, his bulk blocking the easiest access point to load him onto a trailer. "Persistent bastard," one of Drummond's men muttered. "Even drugged, he's trying to protect his territory." As Bill watched helplessly, the men began the process of moving Goliath's unconscious form toward a heavy-duty livestock trailer that had been waiting in the shadows. The sight of his gentle giant being treated like a piece of cargo filled Bill with a rage and despair, unlike anything he'd experienced since the war. The loading process took nearly an hour, requiring a heavy-duty winch and 6 men to maneuver Goliath's unconscious bulk onto the reinforced livestock trailer. Bill watched in helpless fury as his gentle giant was treated like a piece of cargo, his massive form strapped down with chains and restraints that spoke of one-way transportation to a slaughterhouse. "Where are you taking him?" Bill demanded, his rifle still trained on the group, though he knew he was outnumbered and outgunned. Drummond checked his expensive watch with the casual indifference of a man conducting routine business. "Somewhere he can't cause any more harm. somewhere families with young children won't have to worry about a 1,000-pound killer wandering into their yards. Goliath has never hurt anyone, you know that. What I know is that bulls like him killed my son, Drummond said, his carefully controlled facade cracking to reveal the raw obsession beneath. What I know is that every day these monsters are allowed to live, another family faces the same nightmare I've lived with for 10 years. The admission hung in the night air like a confession. This wasn't about public safety or animal control. This was about a grieving father's need to destroy anything that reminded him of his own failures and losses. "Your son died because you were driving drunk," Bill said quietly, "not because of any bull." Drummond's composure shattered completely. "You don't know anything about that night. That animal came out of nowhere, standing in the middle of the road like some kind of demon. If it hadn't been there, if the ranchers in this state knew how to control their livestock, my boy would still be alive. So you've spent 10 years killing innocent animals to make yourself feel better about a tragedy you caused." The truth struck home like a physical blow. Drummond's face contorted with rage and grief, and for a moment Bill thought the man might order his hired guns to shoot him where he stood, but instead, Drummond composed himself with visible effort, his businessman's mask sliding back into place. "This conversation is over, Mr. Harrison. The animal is secured and we're leaving. I suggest you use this opportunity to get your life together, instead of wasting it on misguided attachments to dangerous creatures." The convoy began to move, with Goliath's trailer in the middle position surrounded by escort vehicles. Bill ran after them for several hundred yards before the futility of his pursuit became clear. He stood alone in the middle of the county road, watching the taillights disappear into the darkness, carrying away the only living thing that had brought meaning back to his broken life. The next several hours passed in a blur of frantic phone calls and desperate action. Bill contacted Sheriff Martinez, Elena Vasquez, and Dr. Mitchell, but the reality was harsh. Goliath had been taken from private property by men with apparently legitimate documentation claiming authority to remove dangerous livestock. The legal system that moved slowly in the best of circumstances would take days or weeks to sort through the competing claims and jurisdictional issues. "By the time we get an injunction, it'll be too late," Elena said grimly during a pre-dawn phone call. "If Drummond has taken him to one of his processing facilities, Goliath could be dead before the paperwork is even filed." Dr. Mitchell's assessment was equally bleak. A bull that size, under that much stress, transported while heavily sedated, the survival odds aren't good even if we find him in time. Animals can literally die of heartbreak, especially intelligent ones that form strong bonds with their caretakers. But the most devastating call came from Rebecca, who had heard about the kidnapping through Elena's media contacts. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she sobbed over the phone. "I should have stayed. I should have brought the kids, and we all should have stayed to help protect him." "This isn't your fault," Bill said, though his own guilt was eating him alive. "I should have seen this coming. I should have moved him somewhere safer." "What are you going to do?" Bill looked out at the empty pasture where Goliath had spent his last free hours, at the broken fence posts and churned earth that marked the site of his capture. "I'm going to find him. Whatever it takes, wherever they've taken him, I'm going to bring him home." The search began immediately. Elena used her investigative skills and media connections to track the convoy's route, while Dr. Mitchell contacted veterinary colleagues at meat processing facilities across Texas. Sheriff Martinez coordinated with other law enforcement agencies, though his hands were tied by jurisdictional limitations and the apparently legal nature of Goliath's seizure. Joe Martinez provided the most practical help, lending Bill his truck and volunteering to join the search despite the legal risks involved. "That bull saved my friend's life," Joe said simply. "Now it's time to return the favor." The trail led east toward the Gulf Coast, where Drummond Beef Enterprises operated its largest processing facility outside Houston. The complex covered nearly 100 acres, with holding pens capable of housing thousands of cattle destined for slaughter. Finding one specific bull in that vast operation would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. But Elena's investigation had uncovered something crucial. Drummond maintained a private facility separate from his main operation, a place where he could personally oversee the destruction of animals that held special significance to his twisted campaign of revenge. "It's not on any official records," she explained as they drove through the night toward Houston. "But I found property tax records for a small ranch about 30 miles from the main plant. Drummond bought it under a shell company name 3 years ago." They reached the facility as dawn was breaking over the Texas landscape. The place looked innocent enough from the outside, a modest ranch house, a few outbuildings, and a single large barn that could house a dozen animals. But the high-security fencing and multiple warning signs about trespassing suggested this was no ordinary agricultural operation. Bill's heart nearly stopped when he heard it, the deep, mournful bellowing of a bull in distress, coming from inside the main barn. The sound was weak and broken, nothing like Goliath's normal, powerful voice, but unmistakably familiar. "He's alive," Bill whispered, tears streaming down his face. Joe checked his watch. 7 in the morning. Slaughter operations usually start at 8 hours. "We don't have much time." They approached the barn carefully, watching for security cameras and listening for signs of human activity. The building was larger than it had appeared from the road, with heavy concrete construction designed to contain large animals and muffle any sounds they might make. Through a gap in the siding, Bill could see inside the barn. Goliath was there, confined in a heavy steel chute designed to immobilize cattle for slaughter. The bull was conscious but barely standing, his magnificent coat dull and his eyes glazed with the after-effects of prolonged sedation. But what broke Bill's heart was the change in Goliath's demeanor. The proud, intelligent animal who had faced down armed attackers with courage and dignity now looked defeated, broken by the realization that the humans he had trusted had ultimately betrayed him to his enemies. "We have to get him out of there," Bill said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "How?" Joe asked practically. "That chute is designed to hold animals twice his size, and we'd need a livestock trailer to transport him even if we could free him." Elena was already on her phone, coordinating with sheriff's departments and animal control agencies. But Bill could see the bureaucratic wheels turning slowly, too slowly to save a bull scheduled for slaughter in less than an hour. That's when Bill made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number he'd memorized but never wanted to use. "Drummond," the voice answered on the second ring. "It's Bill Harrison. I know where you are, and I know what you're planning to do." "Mr. Harrison? I wondered when you'd track us down. Come to say goodbye to your monster?" "I've come to make you a deal. Let Goliath go and I'll disappear. Leave Texas, never contact any media, never tell anyone what really happened to your son. You get to keep your reputation and your business, and an innocent animal gets to live." There was a long pause. When Drummond spoke again, his voice carried a note of something that might have been respect. "You'd sacrifice yourself for a bull?" "I'd sacrifice myself for a friend who saved my life when I had nothing left to live for." "Interesting. Very well, Mr. Harrison. Come inside. Let's discuss terms face to face." Bill looked at Joe and Elena, seeing his own fear reflected in their faces. Walking into that barn meant walking into Drummond's complete control, with no guarantee that any deal made would be honored. But through the gap in the siding, he could see Goliath's massive head drooping with exhaustion and despair. The bull who had protected him, comforted him, and given him a reason to live was counting on him now. Bill walked into the barn with his hands raised, knowing he was placing himself completely at Drummond's mercy. The interior was stark and industrial, designed for one purpose: the efficient killing of large animals. Goliath stood in the restraining chute at the far end, his massive head hanging low with exhaustion and defeat. When he heard Bill's voice, the bull lifted his head slightly, and their eyes met across the distance with a recognition that spoke of unbreakable bonds. Richard Drummond stood beside a stainless steel table covered with veterinary instruments, his expensive suit replaced by dark work clothes that suggested he intended to personally oversee Goliath's destruction. Two armed men flanked him, their expressions professionally neutral but their weapons clearly visible. "Mr. Harrison," Drummond said with mock courtesy, "you've caused me considerable trouble over the past few months. But I admire your dedication to a lost cause." "The only lost cause here is your crusade against innocent animals," Bill replied, forcing his voice to remain steady despite the terror clawing at his chest. Drummond's laugh was cold and bitter. "Innocent? That creature represents everything that destroyed my family. The arrogance of ranchers who let dangerous animals roam free. The system that protects livestock over human lives. The reminder that my son died because I couldn't control a simple situation." "Your son died because you were drunk behind the wheel of a car," Bill said quietly. "Not because of any bull." The words hit Drummond like a physical blow. His carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing the raw grief and guilt he'd been carrying for a decade. "You think I don't know that? You think I haven't replayed that night 1,000 times, wondering what would have happened if I'd left the bar 5 minutes earlier, if I'd taken a different route, if I'd been sober enough to react faster? Then why take it out on animals that had nothing to do with your son's death? Because every time I see one of these monsters, I see that night again. I see my boy's face in the seconds before impact. I hear him screaming my name as we hit the guardrail." Drummond's voice broke slightly. "If I can eliminate enough of them, maybe someday I'll stop seeing his face in my dreams." Bill felt a flicker of sympathy for the broken man before him, but one glance at Goliath's defeated posture hardened his resolve. Killing innocent animals won't bring your son back. It won't erase your guilt. It just spreads more pain and destruction to families who don't deserve it. Perhaps. But it's the only thing that gives me any peace." Drummond composed himself and checked his watch. "You mentioned a deal. I'm listening. Let Goliath go. Release him back to my custody and I'll disappear. Leave Texas. Never speak to the media again. Never tell anyone about your campaign against these bulls. You can continue your business without interference from me." Drummond considered the offer, his cold blue eyes calculating the advantages and risks. "And if I refuse? Then you'll have to kill me too, because I'm not leaving without him." "That can certainly be arranged," Drummond nodded to his armed companions. "But before we finalize anything, I want you to understand exactly what your precious bull really is." Drummond walked over to a file cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. "Do you know the real reason I've been tracking animals like this one? It's not just their resemblance to the bull that killed my son. It's their bloodline." He opened the folder, revealing genealogical charts, breeding records, and DNA analysis reports. "Every bull I've targeted over the past 10 years can trace their ancestry back to the same breeding program, the same ranch that owned the animal responsible for my son's death." Bill felt the blood drain from his face as the implications became clear. "That's right, Mr. Harrison. Your Goliath isn't just similar to the bull that destroyed my family. He's a direct descendant. His grandfather was the animal standing in that road 10 years ago." The revelation hit Bill like a punch to the gut. Goliath carried the genetic legacy of the bull that had triggered Drummond's son's death, making him not just a random target, but the culmination of a decade-long quest for genetic revenge. "Even if that's true," Bill said, his voice shaking, "it doesn't change who Goliath is. He's gentle, intelligent, protective. He's saved lives, not taken them. Genetics don't lie, Mr. Harrison. The capacity for violence, for unpredictable behavior runs in bloodlines. Your bull may seem gentle now, but it's only a matter of time before his true nature emerges. As if responding to the conversation, Goliath rumbled weakly from his restraints. The sound was heartbreaking, not the powerful bellow of a proud animal, but the broken cry of a creature who had given up hope. "Look at him," Bill said desperately. "Does he look like a killer to you? He's dying of heartbreak because he doesn't understand why the humans he trusted have abandoned him." Drummond glanced at the bull, and for a moment something that might have been doubt flickered in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by renewed determination. Sentiment doesn't change facts. This animal and others like him represent a genetic line that has caused immeasurable suffering. Eliminating him is a public service. Then you'll have to eliminate me too. The standoff stretched between them. Two men whose lives had been shattered by trauma and loss, each seeing salvation in a different outcome. Bill knew he had no leverage, no way to force Drummond to honor any agreement, but he also knew he couldn't walk away and let Goliath die alone and friendless. That's when they heard the sirens. Drummond's expression shifted from confidence to alarm as the sound of multiple emergency vehicles grew closer. His men moved toward the windows, reporting the approach of sheriff's cars, animal control units, and what looked like federal vehicles. "How?" Drummond demanded. Elena Vasquez stepped through the barn door, her phone in hand and a smile of fierce satisfaction on her face. "GPS tracking, Mr. Drummond. That fancy phone of yours has been broadcasting your location for the past 2 hours. Behind her came Sheriff Martinez, Dr. Mitchell, and a team of federal marshals armed with court orders and arrest warrants. Elena's investigation had finally produced enough evidence to trigger federal intervention for interstate commerce violations and conspiracy charges. "Richard Drummond," announced the lead marshal, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, animal cruelty, fraud, and violation of federal commerce regulations." But Drummond wasn't finished. As the marshals approached, he pulled a pistol from his jacket and pointed it not at the officers, but at Goliath's head. "Everyone stop right there," he shouted. "This ends today, one way or another. If I can't have justice, at least I can have closure." The barn fell silent except for the sound of weapons being drawn and safety catches clicking off. Goliath, sensing the tension and threat, tried to raise his head, but was too weak to fully lift his massive bulk. "Mr. Drummond," Sheriff Martinez said carefully, "put the weapon down. There's no need for anyone else to get hurt." "Hurt?" Drummond laughed bitterly. "Do you know what hurt is? Hurt is burying your 18-year-old son because some rancher couldn't keep his livestock contained. Hurt is living with the knowledge that you failed to protect the most important thing in your life." Bill stepped forward despite the guns trained on Drummond. "I understand that pain. I've buried friends, lost everything that mattered to me, spent years wanting to die because the guilt was too much to bear. Then you know why this has to end. What I know is that killing Goliath won't bring your son back. It won't erase the accident or your guilt. It'll just add another innocent death to the weight you're already carrying." Drummond's hand trembled as he kept the gun pointed at Goliath's head. The bull, somehow sensing the immediate danger, managed to lift his massive head and look directly at Bill. In those intelligent dark eyes, Bill saw not fear, but a kind of peaceful acceptance, as if Goliath understood that his human friend had done everything possible to save him. "He's looking at you," Bill said softly. "He knows you're here. He knows you came for him." Tears streamed down Drummond's face as he stared into Goliath's eyes. For the first time in 10 years, he was looking at one of these bulls not as a symbol of his loss, but as an individual creature capable of love, loyalty, and suffering. "I can't," Drummond whispered. "I can't stop seeing my son's face." "Then honor your son's memory by choosing life over death. choose healing over revenge. The moment stretched endlessly, with a dozen weapons trained on a broken man whose finger tightened on the trigger of a gun pointed at an innocent animal. The only sound was Goliath's labored breathing and the distant wail of more sirens approaching. Finally, Drummond's arm began to shake uncontrollably. The gun wavered, then slowly lowered as his strength gave out. "I just wanted my boy back," he sobbed. "I just wanted to undo that night." The marshals moved quickly to secure the weapon and place Drummond in custody. "Doctor." Mitchell immediately began examining Goliath, checking his vital signs and assessing the damage from hours of stress and confinement. "He's dehydrated and exhausted," the veterinarian reported. "But he's alive and responsive. We need to get him out of this chute and into proper care immediately." It took an hour to safely extract Goliath from the restraining device and load him into Dr. Mitchell's specialized livestock trailer. The bull was weak but alert, his eyes tracking Bill's movements with obvious relief and recognition. As they prepared to transport Goliath back to the ranch, Elena approached Bill with tears in her eyes. "I have something to tell you. We found additional records in Drummond's files, genetic testing results that prove Goliath isn't related to the bull from the original accident. Drummond was wrong about the bloodline connection." Bill looked at the investigative reporter in shock. "You mean this whole vendetta was based on false information?" "Completely false. Drummond's obsession led him to see connections that didn't exist, to create a conspiracy where there was only coincidence. 23 innocent bulls died because a grieving father couldn't face the truth about his own responsibility. The revelation should have brought satisfaction, but Bill felt only sadness for the years of misdirected grief and the lives lost to one man's inability to heal. As they drove Goliath home through the Texas countryside, Bill reflected on the thin line between healing and destruction, between love and obsession. In the trailer behind them, Goliath rumbled softly, not the broken cry of defeat they'd heard in the barn, but the familiar sound of contentment that meant he understood he was going home. The sound filled Bill with a hope he'd thought was lost forever, and for the first time in months, he began to believe that some stories could have happy endings after all. The drive back to the ranch felt like a journey from darkness into light. Bill sat in the passenger seat of Joe's truck, constantly checking the side mirror to make sure the livestock trailer carrying Goliath was still behind them. Every few miles he could hear the bull's soft rumbling, not distressed calls, but the familiar sounds of contentment that meant Goliath understood he was finally going home. Dr. Mitchell had insisted on following them back to monitor Goliath's condition during transport. The veterinarian's initial examination at Drummond's facility had revealed dehydration, stress-induced weight loss, and mild sedative poisoning, but nothing that proper care couldn't heal. "Animals are remarkably resilient," he'd told Bill. "With time and the right environment, Goliath should make a full recovery." Elena rode with them, already working on her follow-up story about the rescue and Drummond's arrest. Federal prosecutors were building cases for conspiracy, animal cruelty, fraud, and interstate commerce violations that would likely put the businessman behind bars for years. More importantly, her investigation had uncovered evidence of the 23 other bulls Drummond had systematically destroyed, opening the door for civil lawsuits from their former owners. "This story is going to change everything," Elena said, looking up from her laptop. "Not just for Goliath, but for livestock protection laws across the country. Your willingness to risk everything for one animal has exposed a pattern of abuse that nobody else was able to document." Bill nodded, but his attention remained focused on the trailer behind them. Through the small window, he could occasionally glimpse Goliath's massive form, standing with the patient dignity that had made him special from the very beginning. When they finally reached the ranch, a crowd was waiting for them. Rebecca's car was parked in the driveway, and Bill could see Emma and Jack pressed against the back window, their faces bright with excitement. Sheriff Martinez was there with several deputies, along with Dr. Mitchell's veterinary assistant and a crew from the local news station that had been following the story. But the most welcome sight was the crowd of neighbors and strangers who had come to witness Goliath's homecoming. Word of the rescue had spread through social media and local news, bringing out families who had been following the story of the gentle giant and his devoted veteran caretaker. Unloading Goliath required careful patience. The bull was weak from his ordeal, moving slowly as he backed down the trailer ramp. But the moment his hooves touched the familiar ground of his pasture, his entire demeanor changed. His massive head lifted, his ears perked forward, and he rumbled with unmistakable joy. Emma and Jack broke free from their mother's grip and ran to the fence, calling Goliath's name with the pure delight of children welcoming home a beloved friend. The bull walked over to them with gathering strength, lowering his head so they could pet his nose through the fence rails. "We missed you so much," Emma said, tears streaming down her 8-year-old face. "We were so scared the bad men were going to hurt you." Goliath's response was a gentle rumble that seemed to say he had missed them too, that their love had helped sustain him through the darkest hours of his captivity. Rebecca approached Bill with tears in her eyes. "Dad, when I heard what happened, when I thought we might lose him forever, I realized something. Goliath isn't just your companion. He's become part of our family." "The kids have been talking about him nonstop, asking when they could see him again." "He's special to all of us now," Bill said, watching his grandchildren interact fearlessly with the massive bull. "He has a way of bringing out the best in people." The crowd that had gathered to welcome Goliath home represented something larger than curiosity about a local news story. These were people who understood that the bond between Bill and Goliath represented something profound about healing, loyalty, and the connections that transcend species boundaries. Dr. Mitchell conducted a thorough examination in the pasture, with Goliath standing patiently while children and adults watched from the fence line. "Remarkable," the veterinarian said as he completed his assessment. "His vital signs are already improving just from being back in familiar surroundings." Animals form emotional attachments to places and people just like humans do. Over the following days, the ranch became an unofficial pilgrimage site for people touched by Goliath's story. Families drove from hundreds of miles away to meet the gentle giant who had captured the nation's heart. Veterans dealing with their own PTSD came to see how the bond with an animal had helped Bill find his way back from the edge of despair. The children were always Goliath's favorite visitors. He seemed to have an intuitive understanding of their size and vulnerability, moving with extra care when little ones were near the fence. Parents who had initially been nervous about their children interacting with such a massive animal quickly realized that Goliath was probably safer than most dogs. Michael arrived from Dallas 3 days after the rescue, his expensive suit traded for jeans and boots more appropriate for ranch visiting. Bill watched nervously as his son approached Goliath's pasture, remembering their previous confrontation about the bull's presence in their lives. "Dad," Michael said quietly, "I owe you an apology that's about 10 years overdue. You were trying to protect me. I understand that. No, it was more than that. I was so focused on fixing your problems that I missed the most important thing. You weren't broken, you were healing, and Goliath was part of that healing in ways I couldn't see." Michael reached through the fence to touch Goliath's nose, marveling at the bull's gentle response. "I spent years thinking you needed professional help, institutional care, medication. But what you really needed was something to love that would love you back unconditionally." The legal aftermath of Drummond's arrest brought its own form of justice. Federal prosecutors moved quickly to build their case, using Elena's documentation and testimony from the families of destroyed bulls to paint a picture of systematic abuse of power and wealth. Drummond's business empire began to crumble as investors and partners distanced themselves from the scandal. But the most satisfying moment came when Dr. Mitchell received a call from a genetics laboratory in California. The DNA testing Elena had mentioned proved definitively that Goliath had no genetic connection to the bull involved in Drummond's son's accident. The entire decade-long vendetta had been based on false assumptions and misdirected grief. 23 innocent animals died because one man couldn't face the truth about his own responsibility, Elena said as she prepared her final article about the case. But Goliath's survival has exposed the truth and ensured that Drummond can never hurt another animal this way. The ranch itself underwent a transformation in the weeks following Goliath's rescue. Donations poured in from supporters across the country, allowing Bill to make long-needed repairs to the buildings and infrastructure. A nonprofit organization dedicated to pairing veterans with therapy animals offered to help establish the ranch as an official therapeutic facility. "You and Goliath have proven something important," said Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychologist specializing in animal-assisted therapy who visited to assess the ranch's potential. "The healing power of human-animal bonds isn't just theory. It's real, measurable, life-changing. What you've built here could help hundreds of veterans find their way back from trauma." The proposal to establish the Harrison Ranch as a therapeutic facility for veterans struggling with PTSD felt like the natural evolution of everything Bill and Goliath had been through together. The bull's gentle nature and intuitive understanding of human emotion made him an ideal therapy animal, while Bill's own journey from the edge of suicide to purposeful healing gave him credibility with other veterans. Rebecca enthusiastically supported the plan, offering to help coordinate medical services and family programs. "Goliath saved Dad's life," she said. "Now they can work together to save other lives." Michael surprised everyone by offering to handle the legal and financial aspects of establishing the nonprofit organization. "I've spent my career helping corporations maximize profit," he said. "It's time to use those skills for something that actually matters." The first official therapy session took place 6 months after Goliath's rescue. A young Marine named Carlos, struggling with severe PTSD after losing his leg to an IED in Afghanistan, arrived at the ranch with the skeptical expression of someone who had tried every conventional treatment without success. Bill watched as Carlos approached Goliath's pasture, his prosthetic leg making walking across the uneven ground challenging. The bull, sensing the visitor's physical and emotional pain, approached the fence with unusual gentleness. "He's huge," Carlos said, unconsciously echoing Emma's first reaction months earlier. "He's also the best listener you'll ever meet," Bill replied. Goliath doesn't judge, doesn't give advice, doesn't expect you to be anything other than what you are. Over the course of an hour, Bill watched Carlos transform from skeptical to amazed to emotionally overwhelmed as Goliath demonstrated his remarkable ability to provide comfort without words. The bull seemed to understand exactly how much pressure to apply when Carlos leaned against the fence, how close to stand without being threatening, how to rumble in ways that vibrated through the young man's chest and eased his anxiety. "I haven't felt this calm in 2 years, Carlos said as the session ended. "How does he know exactly what I need?" "I think some animals are just born with that gift," Bill replied. "Goliath certainly has it." As the therapeutic program grew, Goliath proved time and again that his gentle nature and intuitive understanding of human emotion made him uniquely suited to help people heal from trauma. Veterans who had been resistant to traditional therapy found themselves opening up to the massive bull who listened without judgment and offered comfort without conditions. The ranch's success brought national attention, including a feature story on a major news program that highlighted the innovative approach to PTSD treatment. But for Bill, The real measure of success was simpler: the gradual return of hope to faces that had forgotten how to smile. On the first anniversary of Goliath's rescue, the ranch hosted a celebration that brought together everyone who had been part of their journey. Drummond was serving his federal prison sentence, his business empire dissolved, and his assets being used to compensate the families of the bulls he had destroyed. Elena had won a Pulitzer Prize for her investigative series about agricultural abuse and corporate revenge. Dr. Mitchell had become the ranch's official veterinarian, ensuring that Goliath and the other therapy animals received the best possible care. As the sun set over the Texas landscape, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Bill stood in Goliath's pasture surrounded by the extended family their partnership had created. Rebecca and her children, Michael and his new girlfriend, Joe and his wife, Elena and her photographer, Dr. Mitchell and his veterinary students, all united by their connection to a gentle giant who had taught them about the healing power of unconditional love. Goliath stood in the center of the group, his massive presence somehow making everyone feel safer and more complete. The bull who had once faced death in a slaughterhouse had become a beacon of hope for people struggling with their own forms of darkness. "You know what the amazing thing is?" Bill said to the assembled group as they watched Goliath interact gently with a group of children. "I thought I was saving him that day at the auction, but he was the one doing the saving all along." Dear friends, this story of Bill and Goliath reminds us that healing often comes from the most unexpected places, and that the courage to love unconditionally, whether it's a person, an animal, or a cause, can transform not just our own lives but entire communities. In our golden years, when we might feel forgotten or useless, we can still make a difference by recognizing the broken things around us that need our care. Sometimes the greatest adventures and deepest purpose come when we think our story is nearly over. What unexpected friendship or cause has brought meaning to your life when you needed it most? Have you ever experienced the healing power of caring for someone or something that needed you as much as you needed them?